All right. Thank you for joining us. Today is April 30th, last day of April. And if you are in DC and probably everywhere else on the East Coast, you're experiencing some lovely April showers. I think we've gotten about 1.5 inches of rain already today. So I hope everybody's roofs are not leaking. I'm Tom Amder. I'm president of the National Housing and Rehab Association. And on behalf of our entire team, we are very happy that you're able to join us today and hope that you and your family and colleagues and your residents and everybody else in between are safe and healthy. This week's member town hall, which is our sixth in 6 weeks, we are really excited to host these every week and are looking forward to hosting many more in the weeks to come. But this week's town hall will be focused on multifamily construction and general contracting related issues, obviously through the current lens of COVID-19, the coronavirus. I want you guys to all know, in case you're all been worried, that we have updated the job safety protocols here in the Amder household. And as we are conducting all of these town halls on a go-forward basis, we are observing all the safety protocols. So, of course, we've got our hard hats. I've got my safety vest here and all appropriate PPEs. I've got my mask and, of course, I've got my safety goggles as well. So I hope that generated a chuckle with somebody somewhere. But in all reality, safety is obviously of paramount importance right now, and we'll be talking quite a bit about that today. I did want to point out a couple of resources that you're probably aware of now if you've dialed into these previous town halls. We do have our COVID-19 Resource Center up on our website, housingonline.com, and lots of highlights in our newsletter, but all the breaking news relating to federal, state, and local regulations, legislation, and protocols and rules. We do have our dedicated COVID-19 discussion forum as well. Simply log into your Housing Online email account and you can ask questions and post responses and share resources there. I did want to share that next week's town hall is going to be focused on the tax credit equity markets. So that'll be an interesting and timely topic as well. And in case you didn't see the announcement yesterday, we also did launch our virtual asset management conference. Registration opened yesterday on June 16th and 17th. I'm really happy and pleased with the response that we've gotten so far. We'll be sharing more information about that in the coming days as well. But that is a obviously virtual conference, and I'm pleased to report that registration is free for NH&RA members. So no reason not to sign up if you're interested in these topics. And the registration fee for non-members is very modest. So even if you're not a member, and we hope you will become one, you can be able to participate in that affordably. So moving on into the heart of things, today's discussion is going to be broken down into a couple of components. We're going to start with a roundtable discussion, as we have the last several weeks, where we're going to dig into some pressing issues of the day with our expert panelists. And then we're going to open it up to some Q&A in an open forum. So at any point, if you want to ask questions throughout the presentation, there are two ways to do so, and I actually recommend doing both ways. The first thing you can do is actually use the little question box in your GoToWebinar toolbar. You can write your question in there. And if you want to ask that question in person, you can use the little raise your hand icon in your toolbar as well, and we'll know that you want to ask your question. Please be aware that in order to ask your question, you will actually need to have the, you're going to have your, what's the word I'm looking for? There's a ID that you have to plug in if you're dialed in by phone in order to have voice control. So if you did not do that, we won't be able to get to your question that way. But I'm going to be monitoring questions as they come through and obviously during the open forum as well. And with that, I'd like to introduce our expert panelists. It's a great group of folks, all-star panel once again. In alphabetical order, we have Bob Kleckner with the Whiting-Turner Construction or Contracting Company. Bob is got 34 years in the construction trade, and he leads up Whiting-Turner's affordable housing construction team and has a wealth of knowledge. Next up, we have Darcy Jameson, who's Vice President for Development over at Beacon Communities. I've worked with Darcy on quite a number of initiatives over the years, in particular in our Hope 6 and RAD working groups. She's spoken at numerous NH&RA events, and I happen to know a couple of really interesting deals that she's working on, so I thought I'd highlight them. One is a really cool workforce housing project up in Amherst, Mass., as well as a passive house project in Boston. So a lot of experience on different types of deals. Next up, we have Michael McCleary, who is the president of USA Construction Management. That is the affiliated general contractor of USA Properties Fund. And Michael has constructed over 12,000 units in California in the West, primarily affordable housing over the term of his career over at USA. And finally, we have Tony Starr, who leads the construction law practice at the Mintz Law Firm. He represents both owners and general contractors in private and public real estate projects through all stages of the development and construction process, and will be a wealth of knowledge on today's call. I want to give the panelists just a quick opportunity to add some additional details if they'd like to before we get into the formal program. So if you're a developer or contractor, I'd just say, like, maybe let us know size of your company, the portfolio or types of work that you do, and geographies. And obviously, Tony, maybe describe a little bit about your law practice. So Darcy, how about I start with you, since you're on the far left side of my screen?
That's great. Thanks, Tom, and welcome to everybody who's joining us today. I'm Darcy Jameson with Beacon Communities. We're a Boston-based multifamily developer. We do mainly affordable housing work. We have over 17,000 apartments up and down the eastern seaboard, and have a host of new construction projects underway, and also do a lot of acquisition rehab. We'll get into this today, but all of it is currently on hold, either through government mandate or while we figure out the appropriate health and safety protocol for doing our work safely. Glad to be here today.
Thank you, Darcy. Thank you, Darcy. Michael, do you want to go into a little bit more detail on the USA companies?
Yes, thank you, Thomas. As Thomas said, my name is Michael McCleary. I'm president of USA Construction Management, who is, as Thomas said, the general contracting arm of USA Properties Fund. USA Properties Fund is a vertically integrated developer of multifamily apartments on the West Coast, primarily in California and Nevada. We have historically been an affordable developer. In the last couple of years, we've diversified to the market rate platform as well. We are a non-performing general contractor. We basically are construction managers throughout the entire development process. So from pre-construction activities through turnover to our internal property management division.
Great, thank you, Michael. Bob, tell us a little bit more about Whiting-Turner.
Well, Whiting-Turner is a national contracting firm. We do a wide variety of work. My group specifically works in the affordable renovation and new construction. We do branch out into some market rate senior living, but for the most part, we specialize in affordable housing, both new and renovation for tax credits.
Thank you, Bob. And Tony, can you describe a little bit about your practice?
Sure. Thanks, Tom, and good afternoon to everyone. Appreciate the opportunity of being with you today. It's Tony Starr. I'm a litigation partner at the Boston office of the Mintz Law Firm. We have offices in Boston, New York, Washington, D.C., San Francisco, Los Angeles, and San Diego at last count, but I reside very happily in Boston, not too far from my friend Darcy. And my practice is exclusively in the construction area, working with owners and contractors on all types of construction projects in both the public and private sector, from the start of the project when we work on contract documents together, through construction when issues may come up that require a little bit of a legal eye, and then on the back end of the project, if regrettably the parties aren't able to close out the project collaboratively. I litigate, mediate, and arbitrate. Unfortunately, the last 8 weeks, I would say 80 or 90% of my workday has been full of conversations with both owners and contractors about what COVID-19 means to their projects, how we interpret it under the construction contracts, and how we try and move together collaboratively and resolve this unprecedented challenge to the construction industry.
Thank you, Tony. So now that everybody knows a little bit more about us, I wanted to just do a quick poll for the audience. If you could just let us know, so we know a little bit more about who you are, what you do, and your role in the industry. And we'll just take about 30 seconds for this, and we'll share the results in just a moment. So, all right. This is the 10-second warning for the poll. All right, looks like most of you have voted, so we'll just put the results up on the screen real quick. Very similar to our weekly participation, heavy participation from developers and general partners and the folks in the investing and lending arena, as well as our key partners from our attorneys and accountants and HFA partners and others. So thank you very much. All right, so we're going to jump right into it. So Darcy kind of kicked this off a little bit, but maybe you can go in a little bit more detail. First question for the group, just to provide some context for the rest of the discussion. If you could just tell us a little bit more about the projects you're currently working on and what's their status, just a level set for everybody. So Darcy, you mentioned you had a couple that were not going, but do you want to share a little bit more details just to kick us off?
Yeah, sure. So Beacon has a mix of new construction projects and in-place rehab underway in our portfolio. My work is primarily new construction. Other folks on the team focus more on the in-place rehab. Everything in our portfolio, whether it's new construction or in-place rehab, is halted. And as I said, either because of a municipal mandate, for example, in Boston, the mayor shut construction down about 40 days ago, or while Beacon and our general contractors are collaborating to put together new health and safety protocols so that any in-place work we're doing is protecting our staff, protecting the residents, protecting any inspectors that are going to be on the site, et cetera. And as you can all well imagine, and I'm sure are grappling with it, it's complicated in terms of how you keep everyone safe. So in Boston, the Inspectional Service Department is actually currently reviewing health and safety protocols from general contractors and making decisions about who they're going to let open back up once they review those health and safety protocols and approve them. And those include everything from seeing that they have a nurse that will be on site taking temperatures in the morning, sign-in logs, what the toilet and hand washing station protocol is, disinfecting procedures, sort of what products are going to be used, how often, personal protective equipment, various self-certifications. I mean, really looking for a comprehensive protocol that the GCs submit and get approved before they're able to start back up. I realized over the last couple of weeks that the new construction is actually, as I was sort of saying, much more straightforward than the complexity that goes into the health and safety protocol for in-place rehab, because you have all of that we talked about, but then also thinking about if a resident has tested positive and they're quarantined and they wander out into a hallway, how do you handle that? What about sanitizing elevators as people are using them? It's just, the list goes on. So, so basically, we're in the process of trying to get some of our new construction up and running, and then putting together with our GCs and staff health and safety protocol for the in-place rehab, and thinking about whether we can do in-place rehab or we're gonna have to move people out for health and safety reasons, and what that means. And so I'll stop there. Let other people chime in.
Thanks, Darcy. Michael, how are things looking out in California? Similar to Boston, or different?
I think actually you on the East Coast are, in terms of being shut down and restrictions, are probably heavier than we are on the West Coast, but we are quickly catching up. And I just completed 2 projects under the wire. I have one that did get shut down with 3 weeks left to complete, which actually is against the actual governor. Indicated that they would be willing to allow those projects that are 90% complete to finish. But what we're finding is every county is implementing a different variation of their COVID-19 requirements, which is causing issues of how to keep track of who's doing what and what the rules are. But much like what Darcy said, we are quickly updating our policies and procedure. My safety and health people are working overtime right now to make sure we stay in compliance, and it tends to be a challenge. Having said that, we're getting ready to start one new construction project in Southern California, where the constraints don't seem to be as strict as they are in Northern California. And we're getting ready to do one rehab in Northern California, where we'll have to deal with some of those issues like taking temperatures and checking people in, path of travel, disinfection, things like that. And I would just add to what Darcy said, one of the things that we're worried about is how to do some of the testing requirements that the county health agencies are requesting and not violate things like HIPAA guidelines. So it's going to be interesting. As I said, our consultants are definitely working overtime.
Thanks, Michael. Bob, what about the projects you're working on? What do you have on your plate and how are they going?
Well, thank you. Well, I have 2 that are both open and active. One is a 252 unit new construction. We're probably about 5 months, 6 months into the project right now. It's been open, we've stayed open, but it was interesting there for a while as the Governor Hogan was making decisions. You know, we were preparing to close it down every day, every night we were reopening, but we've actually come up with some pretty nice continuity programs. It's a safety program that we put in place. And then we've asked our subcontractors to come up with their own continuity program. Part of that program is a self-health check. So we're putting the responsibility on the individual workers just to try to minimize that exposure to HIPAA laws. And we're asking people to make that part of their daily field reports, and then we combine it all the way up in our continuity plan. So new construction's going well. We've added quite a bit of hand washing stations. We actually have one guy that walks around and disinfects all the touch points twice a day with a level 3 hydrogen peroxide material that gets diluted. And then we have put into place stair towers. One's going up, the other one's for going down. Levels on new construction are north to south or south to north, so that it minimizes the social distancing opportunity for workers to come close together. So we've done that. Then last week we've closed on a 200 unit renovation project. We've been working with the owner daily to come up with a new procedure for that. We are relocating the tenants, so disinfecting has become interesting there, where we're trying to come up with always keeping a barrier between the residents and the construction. So, you know, we're going to go in and we'll disinfect the corporate unit, and then we'll go and we'll move the residents from their residence into the corporate unit. Then we'll disinfect that unit before we start work. We'll disinfect it again before the resident moves back to their apartment. supply chains, on another hand, supply chains of materials have been very interesting. And we've been working with the local Community Development Administration and HUD to bring as much material in just to make sure that we can guarantee the supply chain to keep construction flowing. And everybody's been working pretty good together in these times. And that's pretty much what we have going on right now, or what I have going on right now.
That's a lot. Tony, your practice, obviously, you're dealing with a lot of different GCs and owners. Is there anything that you've observed in addition to the types of things that Darcy, Michael, and Bob have already mentioned that you want to add to that discussion?
You know, I think I've worked on each of the types of projects that Darcy, Mike, and Bob have described. Obviously, where a lot of my practice is in Boston, on March 16th, Mayor Walsh shut Boston down with several exceptions. And for those projects that got shut down, it was simply a case of working with owner and contractor clients about what work you could do to make the job safe, and then begin the process of thinking about what it would be to restart the project from both perspectives, the owner's perspective and the contractor's perspective. We had an interesting development in late March in Massachusetts, where our governor issued an order that he tried to use certain powers given to him to set construction rules for the entire state. And for about 6 or 8 hours, there was tension between his order, which would have allowed more construction to go forward than the Boston mayor's order, and the order from the mayors of Cambridge and Somerville, 2 other big cities. And eventually they got together, and the governor backed off a little bit and said, this is my order for the state, but of course I'm going to defer to the local municipal authorities, the mayors and the town managers, to determine whether or not work can go forward safely. If they let it go forward, then as a minimum, they must comply with the rules that I've put in place. But if they want to put in more stringent rules or not let work go on at all, then I'm going to defer to them. And that's been the state of play, Darcy, wouldn't you say? Certainly in Boston, where to this day, Mayor Walsh has not allowed work to resume, other than in a few essential categories, such as in our hospitals and in projects that are fighting COVID in some way right now. So we've been doing a lot of work with clients to kind of navigate through there and see where their projects fit in.
Great. So we've talked a lot about safety protocols already, and there's probably some other ones you guys have implemented or considering implementing that we haven't even talked about yet. But I actually saw a couple of questions that have come in over the question box already that I think are relevant to kind of weave into here. So we talked about preparing the job sites and making sure that they're safe. Do you guys have protocols in place for shutting down the construction site, though, if there's an incidence of COVID, on the job site? And how are you approaching that? Bob or Michael, I'll ask you guys to take the lead on this.
Yeah. Well, we did have to shut down one of our projects, and of course, the first thing that we needed to do was to shut it down by contract guidelines, which is proper noticing and items like that. What happened after we put that notice out in compliance with the county order is we were inundated with a number of calls from our subcontractors asking what it really meant and what does it mean to suspend a contract and how do we navigate through the process. And through those conversations, we actually found out there's a lot of fear in the industry as it relates to unemployment and people losing their jobs and things like that. But also, what does it look like to come back on to a project that has been formally shut down by a county agency? And so we're navigating through some of those issues right now. It requires quite a bit of communication. And as we've been talking, a lot of training on what the new protocols are to start construction up again. And last night, the 6 Bay Area counties in California who tend to lead the conversation on COVID-19 are actually starting to release and to ease up on construction. The first pass in March was very restrictive, and in 1 month they are starting to consider what it would look like to release and ease up on some of the constraints. So that's what we're working through right now, and then monitoring the individual county requirements for protection, implementing safety procedures and things like that. Bob, I don't know what you're doing.
Michael, we're following pretty much the same guidelines that you described. We're working very closely with the CDC, local and state health departments. We've had a person come down with COVID virus on one of our job sites, and that was a pretty interesting series of events. You know, we notified the health department, the state health department. They sent us over to the county health department. The good news is the worker has recovered, but we had to go and find everyone on the job site who had direct contact with that person. And those folks needed to self-quarantine for 7 days. So as you can imagine, in an industry where we're already short on workers, we had to lose a few people for a week. I'm happy to report that everybody came back, the workers back safe. But there were a lot of concerns once the person had recovered. Even with the doctor's note, we erred on the side of safety and kept the person off the job site for another week, just to be on the safe side. So,
that seems
like every couple
reasonable.
Of days, we have a couple of scares. You know, people have allergies, people have normal sickness. We had a young man who had bronchitis yesterday, and we're telling everybody, if you feel sick, stay at home. But yet that person still came to work, so which put everybody in jeopardy. So we are doing a few other things like separating our teams, working an A shift and a B shift to separate workers to keep them safer. And we can go into more details on that a little bit.
So Tom, in Boston, when I was getting ready to close down a bunch of new construction projects and demolition projects underway, we were fortunate that we shut down before we had any incidents. But in my conversations with our GCs and lots of conversations with Tony, the thing that we have really been focusing on is not that we would, but skimping at all on all the health and safety protocol when you're bringing people back onto those sites and they're opening up. Because if people feel like they're coming back into an unsafe environment, you're going to see people not being as productive, potentially not coming to work because they're worried about coming to work and going home and exposing people in their house that haven't gone anywhere. So that's really been our primary focus, is how do we make sure we create the safest site possible for our workers, for the workers that are going home to their families, our staff, etc. So it gets to a lot of the protocols that we've been talking about, but also just in terms of making sure people want to be at work and feel comfortable being there.
Yeah. I wanted to touch on something else that was mentioned before. So obviously we really care about the safety of the workers and the safety of the job site. And we also want to make sure that we're protecting their privacy and mitigating liability to the owner as well. So like the HIPAA point that Michael and Bob both made, I think earlier, I think is a good one, where we don't want to overextend and expose the contractor or the owner to new liability. And we want to have also ensure that if somebody does get sick on site, that we're not exposing ourselves to workers' comp claims and other type of liability claims. And Tony, I'm sure you've been thinking quite a bit about how to do that, and if there are some best practices beyond the types of safety protocols that Michael, Bob, and Darcy just mentioned. I thought that would be a good advice for folks on the call.
Yeah, I think Michael and Bob, the protocols that they laid out that they're implementing on their projects is very consistent with what I've been hearing on most of the Boston-based projects. And I would reiterate a point that Darcy made, which is, I think, really important for the owners and the developers on the phone or on the call, on the webinar to think about, which is just making sure that you're creating the safest possible workplace that will give the men and women who are leaving their home each morning and coming to your job site the comfort to know that you're doing everything you can and partnering excuse me, with your construction manager or contractor to make sure that they stay safe, and that when they get home, often to their families who are not leaving their house, that there's a comfort and a security there. The last thing you want is the workers on your job site to feel like you haven't partnered with your contractor to create a safe place, and then they're going to stop showing up. And we've seen that on some projects where certain subcontractors, even on projects that are allowed to go forward, are just sending an email in saying we're just not coming. And while you may have the right under your contract to say, well, you're in default or whatever, that's not going to get your job done. Certainly, from a liability point of view, you want to make sure that your project is a project that is monitoring whatever the best practices are from the local and national health services, and you're seeing that they're done on site. There's currently no rule in place that could bar the family of an employee who contracts COVID or believe they contracts COVID from your job site from filing a claim. So until that law is in place, if it ever becomes in place, as with everything else you do, you want to try and create the safest possible workplace. And that's the strategy that we've been encouraging contractors and owners to think about.
So here's a question for everybody that came from the audience. So these new protocols that we're all incorporating, whether it's the new construction protocols or the rehab type of protocols, how long do you expect those to be in place? Obviously the duration of the crisis, but is this the new normal? Can we expect that this is what construction sites are going to look like a year from now when this has run its course? Because obviously that changes the dynamic of the workplace and the cost structure and a whole lot of other things. So what's your sense of that? Tony's saying not sure.
I think this is Darcy. I don't think we know at Beacon, but we've talked about it quite a bit on the development and management teams, and I think we are assuming it's here to stay for a while. That the protocols may evolve a little bit, but that fundamentally sort of how we approach our work, especially with in-unit rehab or on-site rehab, is going to change drastically for the foreseeable future.
Yes, I would agree that until there's a vaccine, that this is probably our new normal. And we're taking the time to go through and create all new action plans so that we can stay within the guidelines. So we're calling them job site hazardous analysis. So how do two guys that are partners hang a sheet of drywall? or 2 guys that normally set a tub, you know, how do they work within the new guidelines? And there's a whole series of events that takes place in order to do that.
And on the West Coast, we're finding out that it's going to take us a while to get all the subs to perform in a consistent manner, because what we're seeing is some have good policies in place and some don't. And we spend a lot of time chasing them down and ensuring that they have a COVID practice. So I think we're going to be still in the ramping up stage for actually quite a while, probably in the next, I'd say next 30 to 45 days before everyone understands the significance of the issue. And then it's going to be here for a while.
You know, Michael, I'll just augment what you just said with a conversation we were all having yesterday, which is once you've even chased that down and you feel confident that your subs have those protocols in place, it's trusting at some level that they're really going to follow them and then enforcing it and keeping a close eye on it. And that's challenging too.
Exactly, and that's almost what that challenge is big enough that almost identifying an additional person to be your COVID-19 person is going to be key to that success.
I speculate that this is going to drive, if not a wholesale change in the way we build things in general, then at least accelerate the use of more panelization, more modular and factory constructed, if not whole buildings, and components to mitigate, you know, social exposure. So I don't know if that'll play out or not, but that seems like at least one likelihood from my vantage. I wanted to move on to kind of a new set of topics here. When we were brainstorming topics for this the other day, we were talking a lot about conflict resolution, and obviously things are not going according to plans, and there are new costs and delays and all sorts of fun things that are a result of the current crisis. And I wanted to get a sense from all of you on how you are approaching these challenges with your either your contractor or your development partner. And I expect that they're going to be similar but different based on where you sit. So Darcy, maybe we'll start with you. How are you working with your contractors right now to try to get some resolutions?
Yeah, so let me just start with kind of framing what we've sort of seen as kind of the major buckets of costs. I mean, we have costs associated with the shutdown, which will be, by the time we think we're going to start up, about 44 days. So you've got staffing costs during that time. You have costs to make sure the site is safe and secure. You have costs, in my case, it's wood frame construction, and we have the wood frame up. So, you know, there's been a person in there making sure that things get dried out adequately after a rain event so that when we can start up, you know, we are ready to go. So you have kind of the shutdown costs, which are substantial. And then what's been really substantial is our contractors taking the health and safety protocols that they have put together and are in the process of getting approved by the city to start back up. The costs associated, their best guess at implementing that through the duration of a long new construction project. It's a really big ticket item. And then certainly we're going to have schedule delays, and we would anticipate probably some remobilization costs and some supply chain interruption costs. I think Beacon's approach to this has been, our goal is to successfully complete projects and get everybody back to work in a safe environment. And that's sort of first and foremost. From there, our conversations with our GCs have been, you know, these are unanticipated costs. Let's all be fair and reasonable. I mean, our goal, I mean, I spent a lot of time talking to Tony about what the contracts actually say, so that, you know, we're sure that we understand that. But more importantly, our conversations with the contractors so far have not brought up the word contract. It's really, let's like talk about what your direct costs are, you know, let's, you know, not have too much a markup on anything or any markup. I mean, let's just try and do this fairly and get everybody back to work and make sure that the projects are financially feasible. And so far, our conversations have been really fair and really reasonable, and everybody with the same directive. And the GCs have been seeing from their subs so far, we'll see that their subs are not aggressively starting to come back at them saying they want remobilization money, etc. Do we expect some of that? We do. But so far, I feel like people have been very rational and reasonable about just getting things back on track. To somebody's point, people want to be working. Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Darcy. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say, I'm hoping we don't have to move to something more contentious. We've tried to be just collaborative in the dialogue and transparent.
I couldn't agree.
Bob, is that your experience? Good. Yeah.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that approach. I mean, we're lucky that this type of business has a lot of relationship basis to it. And, you know, we have an open book policy. We're trying to do exactly what you're saying, Darcy. We're trying to buy the new scopes of work, get them incorporated into a contract agreement, and show what the actual costs are. We've had some third-party help in that matter, but both of my clients have said, have agreed that as long as it's reasonable cost and nobody's trying to hit a home run off of it, that they're open to reviewing those with us. So it's been a good open door policy and working through these issues. And that's from, you know, going out and looking for warehouse storage space to bring in equipment, to disinfecting, or to additional scope or time that it may take some subs to do their work.
All right. So obviously, it would seem to me that if everybody's trying to be reasonable, you'll get to a reasonable conclusion. But of course, not everybody out there is reasonable for a variety of reasons, good and bad. So Tony, you're a litigator and you're dealing with lots of situations, I'm sure, right now where reason doesn't prevail and the language in the contract is what rules the day. And I was hoping you could provide us with just a quick look at what are some of those key areas within the construction contract that people are disputing over and what people should be paying attention to if they get themselves into a situation like that.
Sure, I'd be happy to address that. So if you think about it in terms of if you're using the AIA 201 general conditions, which is I think a common document, at least we see it on the East Coast a lot, but these clauses would appear in whatever form contract you're choosing to do. The first thing I suggest that folks look at is the compliance with law provision. Does your contract indicate who owns the risk of a change in law? There's one way to look at COVID-19 is that an event happened and now the local and municipal and state authorities are saying there's some new rules and regulations that apply to construction work. In order to do construction work in our city, in our town, in our state, you must take these steps. So those are laws that didn't exist when you signed your contract, but now they're imposed on us quite precipitously. So does your contract have language in that? Now, most contracts say very clearly that the contractor shall comply with applicable law. And that may be all they say. They don't go on to then say what happens if there's a change. Obviously, if you have a change in law provision and it allocates the risk one way or another, then you have a clear provision that may guide your conversation. What's less clear is if you just have language that says the contractor shall comply with applicable law, but it doesn't have that temporal aspect. And from my review of the law over the last few weeks, when this topic has begun to ripen a bit, there's not a lot of law out there on this point. So that's the first thing to look at in your contract. What does your contract say about who owns the risk? The other question, of course, is what happens when something like COVID-19 comes along and it affects the schedule and the cost of the work, and how have you allocated that? Again, in the 201, if that's of the 201 general conditions of the AIA, if you're familiar with that, it's in Article 8. And I would say that in most contracts, it's pretty clear that the pandemic is a cause of delay that is beyond the contractor's control, and that would be deemed an excusable event for which the contractor would be entitled to an adjustment in the contract schedule. And I think that's fairly typical, and you'd expect to see that. But what's less consistent from contract to contract is the compensation, and whether or not the parties have allocated the financial risk associated with delay from COVID. What you're going to be looking for is, does your contract have a no damages for delay provision, or is it some limited damages for delay provision? The AIA 201 unedited is silent on that, so it leaves the contractor the opportunity to present a claim and then make an argument that they're entitled to it under the contract. So that's the second provision that folks should go take a look at. Obviously, all contracts have a notice provision, Tom, and while I think the whole construction industry was on notice that the pandemic was arriving in March and began to affect our projects, certainly the contractors were required to provide notice. I think most of them did, and then they're supposed to provide you with good documentation. The last provision, which I don't think caught everybody's attention right away, but certainly has entered into the conversation, is in your AIA general conditions, Article 14.1.1, for those of you making notes, is the provision that allows a contractor to terminate if the project has been suspended by government order for 30 consecutive days. In Massachusetts, Boston in particular, by way of example, we have been shut down, as Darcy said, for approximately 40 or 42 consecutive days. So if you hadn't, if that language has not been edited in your contract and you have the AIA 201, the contractor may now exercise a termination right because the job's been shut down by government order for more than 30 consecutive days. And under that Article 14.1.1, 14.1.3 in particular, if the contractor exercises that right, the contractor is entitled to be paid according to the AIA document for the work performed to date and overhead and profit on work not performed. So again, an important provision for, I think, the developers on the call to be mindful of as you go into these conversations. If you're in one of the situations as we are in Boston, where we've been suspended for 40 days now, and you may feel like you have a no damages for delay provision, you know, your contractor may say to you, you don't want to pay me for any of the delay, you don't want to pick up any of these costs, fine. I'm going to exercise my right to terminate, and you'll not only have to pay me for the work I've done, but overhead and profit on the work I haven't done. Those are the four provisions most important, I think, to the discussion if you're under the AIA. I saw Michael and Bob kind of looking at me when I was talking about that termination if you're shut down for more than 30 days. I didn't write it, the AIA put it in. I think that on some of the contracts I have worked on in the past for owners, I had increased that to 60 to 90 days. But of course, it wasn't because I thought a pandemic was coming. It just felt like it would give my owner clients more protection. But a lot of contracts leave that at the 30-day limit, and that does give the contractor the right to think about a termination.
Well, a lot of things to think about there on your existing contracts, and probably provisions you want to take a look at as you're initiating new contracts. Michael, I wanted to ask you a similar but slightly different question. Obviously, you're a vertically integrated development and construction firm. So hopefully when conflicts arise, it's you can walk over to Jeff's office or the other way around and solve them. But you also have, less recourse in a lot of ways because of that. And you may have different problems that may arise upstream, perhaps with your construction lender or other parties. I wonder if you have any thoughts or advice for other vertically integrated development construction companies on how to deal with these sets of circumstances where, you have to make a deal with yourself and you can't sue yourself.
Yeah. It is definitely different from enforcing a contract with a peer GC. The challenge that we have, as an example, as I indicated, we have actually 2 projects that are in final financing stages, and we're trying to talk to our lenders and investors about adding COVID-19 language to the AIA contract, and they are not having it. They're not excited about it, and it's a challenge. I think that part of the industry needs to catch up. We are talking to our banks right now. I think everyone's aware of we're basically in a land that no one's been to before. So they're working with us in the current scenario, but as it goes forward, I think it's fairly unidentified right now how our investor partners and our lenders are going to be working with us to get through the issue. As you indicated, no, we can't sue ourselves, and all of our effort right now is to make sure that we pass through that AIA 201 through our subcontract agreements. Bob, I'm sure you're doing a lot of the same. The challenge, though, it's the same. How are we going to legally get through this next really 30 to 60 days? And I got to be honest, I don't have all the answers to that right now.
Yeah, a lot of uncertainties. Want to move on to one more topic before we go to more questions from the audience. And so we've talked about existing deals, existing projects that have been contracted and are under some stage of construction. But obviously, new allocations continue to proceed. People are acquiring new properties and new dirt, and they want to do new projects and initiate new contracts. So I'm curious how all of you are looking at new deals right now and what trends you're seeing and what things you might be looking for in new contracts and what trends you're seeing maybe in terms of pricing or how you're documenting, or this is a question from the audience that I'll throw in there. What sort of response are you seeing from bonding agents, and are you able to get a performance bond in the new environment? So feel free to take a bite at any of those items.
Well, I'll tell you this, Bob, I don't know if you've done it lately, but the indemnity clause sure is being reviewed right now. There's no doubt about that. Amazingly, I'm signing new indemnity agreements from my surety on some of these things.
Absolutely, and we're also seeing the same thing coming back, a lot more pushback from subcontractors with regards to indemnification as well.
I think I have been fortunate enough to be asked to start work on a couple of new projects, which is obviously exciting to think that folks have the confidence to go forward and think about new work, and that's great. One approach that I've suggested the parties to take, particularly parties who've already worked together, an owner and a contractor. As Bob and Michael said, it's a relationship business. They probably have a form contract that they're very comfortable working with. Their teams know where everything is. But clearly, you have to deal with the issue of COVID-19 on a new project right now. It's no longer unforeseen. So if you left a an AIA contract as is, the contractor is just not going to sign it, in my opinion, right now, because COVID-19 is no longer an unforeseen condition. So unless you specifically address it, there's a very good chance that the contract unedited would put it on the contractor, and they're not going to take that risk. So what I've suggested is to work on a COVID-19 rider. Just draft up a separate rider, and on the start of it say, notwithstanding anything else to in the contract to the contrary, this rider controls, and try and insert whatever it is you want to try and agree on between the parties, and everybody's going to be different. Acknowledge the existence of COVID-19. Acknowledge that none of us really know. Is this going to affect our new project for 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, a year? We don't know if the virus is going to surge and then recede, and whether certain requirements are going to be dropped down and go back. We don't know any of that. And decide up front how you're going to allocate those costs. One of the techniques I've suggested to people is to set up a COVID-19 allowance. Set aside some money and bill against it. Make it very transparent. Try and identify what the costs are that would be subject to the allowance, and put in some processes so an owner can examine those costs. Perhaps, as Bob and Michael suggested, the contractor should agree that there's no profit, no markup on COVID costs, to try and be more collaborative. Another technique I've seen on some smaller projects is create a contingency as opposed to an allowance, where the contractor says at the start of the new project, based on the current COVID-19 requirements, create a contingency hypothetically of $200,000, and I will work within that contingency so long as there's no change in the rules. But if the rules change by the government, then I get a change order over and above the contingency. But I now understand COVID-19 well enough. I'll try and control the costs, and that, of course, the contingency gives the owner greater certainty than an allowance, which if it gets exceeded, you just get a change order and you go from there. So, and then the other one, obviously, on new contracts, based on what I said before, is folks have got to think about that change in law provision. There's going to be a lot more attention now to what happens when laws change during the course of the project, and being much more transparent at the start of the project as to who owns that risk.
You know, Tony, one of the things that I think it's also important to keep in mind is we're worried about the 2020 pandemic. Remember that this could easily go into 2021. What happens this upcoming fall and this upcoming winter? So as we look forward, it's probably important to look past the 2020 season and into the 2021 season as well. So to your point on contracts, especially new contracts that are going to span multiple years, it becomes probably a fairly complex issue.
I agree. I think you're absolutely right, Michael. Short of a vaccine, we're going to be living with this COVID-19 impact on construction projects until, as Bob said, until there's a vaccine and the virus is treated more like the common flu. We're going to have these impacts on the job site for months and months and months on into 2021 for sure.
Tony, you make a good point, and we just signed an agreement last week where, you know, we're past the COVID. We acknowledged it, and I wish we'd have been smart enough to put it all into an exhibit, but we did outline in our clarifications and exclusions, and we tried to say, okay, here's what we know, and this is the path that we're going to have to go. So you're right. That's definitely going to be the future, how we're going to sit down and add COVID-19 into a project.
So let me ask another question about new deals going forward. So obviously a lot of construction is not happening right now that under ordinary circumstances would be competing for the same labor force that we're competing for. So hard to imagine that those big hotel projects and some of those big commercial projects are going to continue to go at the same pace that they have been for the last several years. So we've been hearing from some of our members that they're getting more access to subs on site on existing deals, and that they're seeing the labor marketplace change in a positive way for the affordable housing community. And I'm just curious if that's what you guys are seeing playing out, and if so, is that just temporary, or will that be hopefully more enduring, since we've seen costs go up so much over the last couple of years?
So this is Darcy. I'm not sure yet, but I have a new construction project that's going to close hopefully in August. We're demolishing buildings right now and targeting to close 100% affordable, 100% union. And our general contractor was just finishing up all of the pricing when all of this kind of started, because we were targeting closing in June. And so we were getting ready to pin down our final number to go to contract. And we've now, gone back and said, we don't want you to 100% reprice the job, but they're definitely back out to some of their key subs and key trades, et cetera. And I think we're optimistic that we will maybe at least not see any increases, and maybe even some better pricing, but we don't really know yet. But also some good data soon.
Bob or Michael, are you seeing that play out?
On the jobs I have actively going, we are seeing some extra workers showing up on the job site. But until we get through all these new activities, it's hard to put everybody to work and still maintain the social distancing issues. So it's hard just to flood a job now. So luckily, one of the jobs is a pretty large job and it's spread out, so we were able to put more people to work. But I hope if I could find one positive out of all this, maybe some of the younger people will consider the trades or going into construction, so that they see this as essential work, and that these jobs were available even during COVID-19. So I think that's something as an industry we should be proud of, that we've helped keep the economy going.
Yeah. So, one thing, Tom, just to add to what I said and augment some of Bob's, I think we're hoping that maybe we don't see costs escalating as fast, but we also know that, for example, on this project, the GC may push the construction schedule out to be a little bit longer, because they know they're not going to be able to work as efficiently. So there may be some cost savings in the labor force, and even maybe some materials. But we also know that some of that might get eaten up because of lack of efficiency and longer duration projects. And I don't know where that's going to shake out yet.
Is it possible to add like a second shift on some of these projects? So, obviously, usually the construction hours are 7 to 3, 7 to 4, something like that on a lot of sites, just to take advantage of light. But is that a strategy to not just alternate days like we talked about before, but split up, over time on the same days? And I don't know, maybe that's not reasonable, or maybe it is under certain conditions, but is that a way to make up some of the time loss?
I don't know about making up time loss, but Bob made mention about how we're having to look at bringing subcontractors on the site. Path of travel, as Bob mentioned, is critical now. Making sure that we can move people around the job site is critical now. And a lot of the ordinances that we're seeing from county health are requiring and using language that says, to the effect, to the highest extent possible, which leaves a little wiggle room, do a shift pattern. Just bringing your people onto your job site is now an issue that needs to be managed, that you cannot have what in California they're calling you can't have a choke point as you're bringing people either into a building or onto a job site. So a lot of the language we're seeing from the county is requiring very definitive strategies on moving people either onto the site or through the site. Bob, you were indicating that you've already implemented some of that. As an example, having dedicated stairwells and having your corridors being east-west, north-south, and just moving people around the job site is becoming more and more of an issue. Did you want to expand on that?
Sure, and we started taking a bigger look. We did look at a second shift, but unfortunately, a lot of both of my projects are in a residential setting. One's in a neighborhood already occupied with residents, so working that late shift really didn't pan out. Some extra stuff that we've done is, we've left more openings in the exterior, some window openings. So, when we're stocking buildings, we think that we'll be able to stock later into the evening when the daily workers leave. We'll be able to keep people there just to stock so that we're not seeing that traffic pattern in the corridors and stuff like that. But we're going to be able to take stuff that would normally go up in an elevator. We'll take it up outside the building and bring it through the exterior, just to keep that traffic out of the interior of the building.
I want to just pose one last, I don't even know if it's a question, but just a thing to think about. The way Davis-Bacon wages are calculated, are based on wage survey too. And I would imagine that we may see some movement as a result of everything that's going on there on Davis-Bacon as well. So just a thing that, I don't know, there's a question in there, but it's another factor that's out there. We got a whole bunch of questions over the last hour related to occupied rehab. So I wanted to go back to that for a little bit. And there were a number of questions that were something along the lines of, as we move away from occupied rehab to relocating residents, either for shorter periods or for longer periods of time or for extended periods of time even, what are the protocols that you guys are using to move residents either to the hospitality unit or to offsite in a safe and sanitary way for their health and for your workers' health? And are there major changes that you've done there beyond budgeting for more of that?
Well, on the affordable side, a lot of that is governed by policy, right? And how we relocate is often defined by the affordable housing guidelines. Really, our property management division would probably be better qualified to answer that question. Darcy, maybe you have more experience.
Yeah, so my caveat is that my work is mostly new construction, but I have been sitting in listening to some of these conversations. I think certainly the old way of doing things with the units fully occupied over, I think our team is actively thinking through like what is going to be the right protocol, and the right protocol may vary by population and by building. Can we do short-term work in units and just have people in a day unit? So there's a cleansing protocol that goes on after the residents move out in the morning. People work all day and then happens again and folks can come back. And then what the protocol is if we're moving them out for an extended period of time, whether that's a week, couple of weeks. But part of what our team is really starting to study is, we know we'll start to trigger the Uniform Relocation Act after a certain point. I think, Mike, that's to your point of, triggering some of the affordable housing rules and regulations. So, that's all of what our team is actively analyzing right now. The senior team that does a lot of the acquisition rehab work with our general contractors.
So we had a meeting yesterday to start talking about, we had the developers, resident relocation specialists involved in it. And we were just starting to get, starting to send notice out to the residents. I'm surprised, I won't be surprised if when we send that notice out that a lot of the residents say, I'm not going to move at this time. and it'll be interesting in how we accomplish that. As for in-place renovation, we have been thinking about that. We have a job that's supposed to scheduled to start in October. And as of right now, I don't know that I could, to Tony's point, I don't know that I could sign the contract, because right now I just don't know of a way to how I would keep both the construction people and the residents safe against this virus that I can't even see.
Well, to make it worse, Bob, the part of the problem is on a temporary relocation, don't we use a lot of hotels to do that? And that is going to cause a lot of anxiety and fear on that end of the spectrum as well. What hotel is doing the right COVID cleaning, and how does that all work? And so on a temporary relocation of, say, 1 to 2 weeks, I'm not even sure that that I know that the exact solution that we've gone to historically will work in today's environment.
Yeah, I agree.
I'll take it one step further. A lot of those hotels are closed right now, and with not a time horizon for reopening at all, even if they are, so you have to find one that's open that is also following the right protocols.
One of the things that we've also been talking about, which of course has tremendous financial implications, if you've got a 100-unit occupied building and you're assuming you're just going to do in-unit occupied rehab, now do we vacate 10 apartments over some period of time, and it's just one-way moves we renovate those units, and then one-way moves while we make our way through the building? I think everyone knows how those costs and challenges through.
What do you do with their possessions? So if in furniture, now are we going to have to hermetically seal and then come back with a disinfection protocol that that may be unknown at this time, or do you move all the absolutely vacate the apartment? I mean, it's going to be interesting.
So we thought about that, and the one-way move is pretty unique. We thought that we would move them and let them take their apartment address with them. So we would change the meter. If it's individually metered, all the utilities would get switched. So if they lived in apartment 201, when they move, their new location would still be apartment 201. We would just transfer the feeders to be able to do that. So there would be no utility charges or no change in people's address and saving all that aggravation. But the residents had some comments on, they like the view out of their window, and so we're into this pretty in depth, and there's a lot to be thought of. We thought about when we're moving, what type of PPE does the movers wear? Would they have full tie-back suits and mask and full face shields? And can we get all that equipment? So there's a lot of questions still left to be open in order to do that. But the same thing, it's working in an occupied, I would think that the contractors would almost have to be in a full PPE, tie-back suits and glasses, and I'm not sure we're ready for that at this point.
So I'd like to take a couple of questions from the audience. We've had a couple of people with their hands up, waiting very patiently. So Rebecca Wachtel, I'm about to unmute your microphone, so you are live now. And I just want to remind everybody else on the call, if you'd like to ask a question, just either plug it into the question box or use the use the raise hand feature on your GoToWebinar bar. So Rebecca, are you still there? Did we lose you? Oops, I think we lost Rebecca. Well, I'll go to another question just while we wait for the next person to raise their hand. We got a good question from the audience here. What recommendations are you guys using in terms of securing your job sites that may be closed down, or maybe the security company that you're using, isn't included in a essential worker definition? Obviously, there are restrictions there, and you want to protect your job site for a variety of reasons. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I can tell you what we did on our new construction. Right at the end, about 4 weeks ago, we thought we were going to be shut down. We were in the middle of framing. So we went out and we purchased a lot of boat wrap material. So wherever we had a vertical opening on the end of the building, we actually went ahead and shrink wrapped it like we were putting a boat away at the end of the year. And we had the roofing company, felting that roof in and running shingles right up to the edge. So we were trying to be in a position to minimize any water damage, that if the building was left open at the end of the week or the end of the day, how could we close up that building? We also used 2 security systems. We used a thermal imaging ProVisual system to do the perimeter of the site, and we use Ring to use monitoring for motion and being able to talk through those speakers. So if we do see somebody on the site, we can actually go on our cell phones and talk to them, tell them that the police are being called. One of our big concerns is that would the police respond? So, we wanted to make sure that we had good recordings of the site and all the different angles.
From our perspective, our project that got shut down is in its final stage. So the fencing we relocated our fencing to cordon off that phase of construction that was not approved and not occupied. We, like Bob said, we've increased our cameras to have video surveillance of the projects. But one of the interesting things that we found is are maintenance companies allowed to come in and maintain landscaping? Or, what is the difference between a maintenance company and a construction company? Because most of the ordinances are very clear about construction, but they're a bit ambiguous about maintaining existing facilities. So that's been a little bit of a challenge for us. And to right now, we have just assigned some value to lost or damaged either landscaping or materials, and basically securing the site without any entrance to it.
So this is Darcy. We're the other end of the spectrum. We had wood frames up, no windows, no roofs, just sort of wide open plywood. So our construction fence was still up. This is also built in an area where Beacon has a pretty large portfolio. So from a security perspective, our GC locked up the site tight. We asked our security patrols to continue to keep a heightened eye on everything. And we have been allowed to have a super that's, can be on the site and keep an eye on things. And so they're in and out, making sure the site's, as dry as possible, monitoring what's going on. And, when it's time to start back up, I'm not an expert in all this, we'll do all the antimicrobial spraying, drying out the wood, policies and procedures. So they've spent a lot of time in this shutdown period, really thinking about what they can be doing now and what they will do as soon as we open back up and are in go mode.
Darcy, this is a question. Are you carrying the builder's risk, or is the general contractor carrying the builder's risk? And do you feel that any of that recovery cost of maybe drying out the wood or anything, will that be able to be passed on to the builder's risk policy?
Bob, we're still looking into it, but the initial read is probably not.
It's interesting.
Well, a perfect question there too, because the latest question just came in. It's related to builders risk policies, and that was, what modifications are you making to your builders risk policies in order to get COVID-19 related coverage? I don't know if you guys are in the insurance procurement end of your respective companies, but that's obviously taking into account delays and things like that, covered peril, all those fun provisions.
So
any thoughts?
The one area that we had to increase was the storage of material, whether it's on site or off site. we're out trying to procure as much material as we can to keep that construction flow going. But most of our policies had a minimum amount of coverage for if we're putting it in a container on the job site and the job was closed down, would that builder's risk still cover it for a long period of insurance versus a short period of insurance? And what was the maximum amount covered for stored material?
Bob, how are you doing that? And on a builder's risk claim, you'd have to really, without a COVID-19, I don't think there's a vehicle right now, because the only clause that we have is force majeure, and that's I don't think that gets you to where you need to be. And I don't think the industry's prepared. I don't know this. I think the insurance industry is going to be dealing with as much of this ambiguity as we are, and I'm not sure whether or not they're responding to COVID-19 or not.
And that's it. We're in the midst of dealing with it, and interesting enough, it's on my project that closed after we knew about COVID-19, so we can't really use the force majeure language. So, and the owner's carrying, or the developer's carrying, the builder's risk. But, from my perspective, if I'm talking about bringing $1 million, $2 million worth of product out to the job site and putting it in containers, and there's a possibility that the government could say, stay at home now, what happens with all that material? And before I make that investment, I'm trying to figure out all those different requirements and if it's possible to get that insurance.
Yeah, I think this discussion just shows how big this issue really is. It's not just about shutting down job sites. It's affecting so many different industries other than construction and development. I mean, it does speak to how big our family really is.
Another question I had, we've kind of touched on it a little bit, but tangentially, I would have thought that there would have been a lot of supply chain issues coming down the pike for us, just between work stoppages domestically and international trade drying up in a variety of ways. Bob, you are obviously trying to stockpile. You said that already. Are you seeing shortages in any particular key building materials or particular suppliers, or is it, what are you guys seeing out there?
Well, there's a lot of the lumber for the East Coast comes from Canada, and there's a border restriction on right now. So there's a question of how long does that supply of lumber last? How do we get all the lumber across the border? What we're really seeing is factories, Pennsylvania kitchen cabinet manufacturing plants are shut down. They're telling us that their backlog will be 6 to 8 weeks once they reopen. We were used to getting stuff in 3 to 5 weeks. So we're managing all that. And our fear is that they're telling us 6 to 8 weeks, but what happens when they come back? Will they only have half their workers? Will they start breaking their workers in? So if somebody comes in, the question is will they only be able to produce 50% of what they used to produce? So we're seeing door hardware coming out of Mexico. They're talking that there could be a 10 to 12 week delay there. And that's where I feel being able to procure and get that material in hand well before you typically would have it delivered to a job site. And 2 weeks ago, there was a shortage on containers. We were having a hard time getting actual containers because, if we're thinking about it, everybody else has already thought about it too. So it's just the details of every different activity have to be rethought about and worked through as a team, really.
Mm-hmm. Are you guys able to get enough personal protective equipment as well? Is that it's obviously in short supply in hospital settings, but is it sufficient for your job sites?
Well, it's been interesting that the owner of our company, or the president of our company, told the hospitals that we would give them our N95s. So we had to go to a different level of face mask. Maryland is allowing us to use bandanas or different face shields, and we've been able to get it. And I'm truly surprised at how the subcontractors, for years you'd have to walk around and say, put your hard hat on, put your safety goggles on, but the contractors really are wearing these masks, and I give them a lot of credit. If you want to go up and you have that face shield on, you're walking up 4 flights of stairs. It's a new experience. So so far, there was a time when hand sanitizer was an issue. I'm sorry to say that the toilet paper in the porta pots were disappearing. People were taking the rolls home, so some of that stuff became interesting in getting it. But the supply chain seems to have recovered somewhat.
Well, we only have a couple of minutes left, and I wanted to give each of you an opportunity to share some closing thoughts. If something, one key takeaway you want to make sure our audience takes back with them, or some issue perhaps that we didn't get a chance to get to. I just wanted to make that time available. So I don't know, Darcy, do you have any wisdom to send us off on?
I guess I would just say I feel like we are in a period now where sort of trust and communication and transparency and just being reasonable is going to be paramount.
Tony, how about you?
Well, to piggyback a little bit on what Darcy said, on a number of my projects where the owner has received notice of claim and the contractor has sent the notice out, and there seems to be this start down the positioning under the contract, I've encouraged my owner clients to reach out to the contractor and say, do what you need to do under the contract, but let's sign an agreement where we can talk confidentially, maybe take positions which wouldn't be the same as what the contract calls for, but we've got to work together. Maybe there'll be a time where we have to go back to the contract, but let's sign a simple agreement, making all of our settlement conversations regarding COVID-19 confidential, so we can really talk about how we can get back to work, share the pain, but also focus on the good of getting jobs restarted in a fair manner.
Good. Bob, how about you?
I think the way I've been explaining this, is it came on like a light switch. Somebody flipped a switch and this virus was here. And the best thing that I've heard lately is coming out of it's more like a dimmer switch. You're going to see ramps where we're going to start to go faster, then we're going to have to slow down again. Tony, I think that agreement that you talk about makes a lot of sense. I think it would ease the tension on both sides. We're laying money out. We knew we were going to get our costs back. That would be a win-win, I think, in my opinion. But I do think that we're going to see a couple different waves before we get to a vaccine. Be careful.
I'll send you my template, Bob.
Michael, how about you? You've got the closing word.
I would just say one of the things that has impressed me about our industry over the last 35 years of my experience is we're all fire people, right? We all wear firemen's helmets and we're problem solvers. And the great thing about our industry is we're willing to collaborate and to solve those problems in a manner that helps one another and moves the industry forward. And I think, Tom, the webinar that you put together is evidence of that. I think we have always been willing to share information and share solutions, and I think that's what's going to get us through this next bit of time as we all struggle. I would just encourage us to share the successes and the constraints that we're dealing with, and together we'll find a good answer, and it'll be one that really incorporates the family of businesses that are involved in housing. So I'm encouraged by that.
Thank you very much. Yeah, we all need to be pulling together right now. I want to thank all four of you, Darcy, Michael, Bob, and Tony, for sharing today and embracing that collaborative spirit as we navigate these difficult times. I want to thank my colleagues, Brooke and Caitlin, who've been behind the scenes making sure that the technology worked and that everybody was able to sign in. Just a quick reminder, next Thursday at 3 o'clock, the next town hall will be focused on the tax credit equity markets. And I want everybody to be safe and wear their masks for the rest of the week. So with that, have a great afternoon. I hope you learned a lot, and we will continue the conversation. Have a great day.
Thanks, Tom.
Thanks, folks.
Thanks, guys.